Have you ever wondered how a small island nation once built visions of the future that Hollywood later stole? The 1960s in Britain were years of atomic fear and quiet genius when studios dared to imagine robots, governments, and realities gone wrong. But some of those films vanished forgotten, buried under censorship or ridicule. Today we uncover 12 lost British sci-fi films that predicted the future with eerie precision. Number 12. The Day the Earth Caught Fire, 1961. It began as a newspaper thriller, but became one of Britain's boldest warnings. The Day the Earth Caught Fire was a critical hit, yet a box office gamble. Director Val Guest created a world overheating after nuclear tests tilt the Earth off its axis. London sweltered, rivers dried. Humanity counted its final days. Shot in sharp black and white with searing orange filters, the film's look mirrored its panic. Journalists scramble to uncover the truth while governments lie and scientists whisper that time is running out. Some viewers saw it as prophetic. Others accused it of fear-mongering. British censors hesitated because of its anti-nuclear undertones, and that ending which offered no real hope. Behind the scenes, Guest fought studios that wanted a happy ending. He refused. He said life itself rarely ends tidy. Critics loved its realism, and the film even won a BAFTA for its writing. Yet it faded from memory when flashy American disaster films stole the spotlight. Decades later, climate scientists revived it as a prophetic masterpiece. Watching London engulfed in heat now feels hauntingly familiar. The Day the Earth Caught Fire was not just science fiction. It was a forecast of everything we fear today. Number 11. Unearthly Stranger, 1963. It looked like a small studio curiosity, but it hid something chilling. Unearthly Stranger followed a government scientist who suspects his perfect wife is not human. She never blinks. She cries real tears that burn, and every time he reveals classified secrets, someone dies. Released quietly during the height of Cold War paranoia, it blurred domestic life with cosmic horror. Critics called it strange. The government found it unsettling. Some whispered it was inspired by MI5 experiments with emotional surveillance. What began as a low-budget thriller turned into a film too unnerving for television re-release. The production faced chaos. Producer Albert Fennell argued with censors over scenes showing psychic assassination. American distributors trimmed entire minutes fearing it would upset audiences. Yet, the uncut version screened once in London and became a cult myth among British students. Its themes of alien infiltration and emotional control foreshadowed decades of cinema, from The Stepford Wives to The X-Files. In the end, Unearthly Stranger was less about aliens and more about love stripped of humanity. It predicted a future where emotion itself could be monitored, regulated, or erased. Number 10. The Man in the White Suit, 1951. Technically a decade earlier, yet spiritually pure, 60s satire. The Man in the White Suit starred Alec Guinness as a scientist who invents a fabric that never wears out, never gets dirty. It should have been progress. Instead, it triggered panic. The textile industry collapses, workers riot, power fears perfection. The film was a dark comedy, but its ideas cut deep. Progress became threat. Innovation became rebellion. Censors debated its tone, calling it subversive, anti-capitalist, and dangerous. Britain, still recovering from war rationing, was not ready to laugh at industrial collapse. Guinness struggled with the role balancing innocence and madness. Director Alexander McKendrick fought Ealing Studios executives who wanted a lighter ending. When released, it confused audiences. Was it comedy or prophecy? Critics eventually hailed it as visionary, predicting automation, job loss, and corporate greed decades before reality caught up. Over time, The Man in the White Suit became required viewing for economists and futurists. It showed how the pursuit of perfection can destroy society from within. The film remains a mirror for our age, where technology moves faster than conscience. Number 9. Children of the Damned, 1964. When British cinema returned to the eerie calm of science fiction, it found its voice again in Children of the Damned. Released as a spiritual sequel to Village of the Damned, this haunting film told of 6 children from different nations born with psychic powers. They could manipulate minds. They could make adults obey. They could destroy armies with a glance. Audiences expected pulp horror. What they got was a political parable. These children were symbols of the nuclear powers themselves, weapons too intelligent to be controlled. The film was terrifying not because of monsters, but because of its silence. The kids never raised their voices yet. They forced governments to confront their own cruelty. Censors feared it. Its release during the Cold War meant every image of telepathic children uniting the world against military violence looked suspiciously anti-establishment. American distributors cut entire lines referencing world peace. British television refused to air it for years. Even the church condemned it as morally corrupt. Behind the scenes, director Anton Leader worked under constant pressure. MGM wanted action sequences. Leader wanted moral dread. He won. The resulting film was slow, strange, and hypnotic. Critics called it unnerving. Viewers left theaters whispering about secret government experiments on psychic children in London hospitals. Decades later, scientists cited its eerie accuracy in depicting group consciousness. It predicted debates about artificial intelligence and global control before those terms even existed. Children of the Damned endures as Britain's quiet prophecy, a warning that the next evolution might not be mechanical, but moral. Yesterend, number 8. The 10th Victim, 1965. Long before reality television ruled the world, Britain imagined it as blood sport. The 10th Victim was a bizarre co-production between Britain and Italy, set in a future where murder was legal, as long as it was televised. Contestants hunted each other for fame ratings and corporate sponsorships. Critics dismissed it as absurd, but the film's neon costumes and game show violence mirrored a future closer than anyone realized. It was released during a period of social tension when television had begun shaping national thought. Censors hated the satire. Scenes showing cheering audiences as people were killed felt too close to home. The British Board of Film Censors demanded cuts, calling it morally unfit for general release. Behind the camera, chaos reigned. Studio executives clashed over tone. Should it be comedy or horror? The result was both, a sleek, surreal nightmare. Star Ursula Andress brought glamour but also controversy as the face of a system selling death as entertainment. Her performance turned her into a reluctant symbol of commercial exploitation. Audiences abroad loved it. Britain ignored it. Yet decades later, its predictions of televised violence, social media celebrity, and brand worship felt prophetic. Academics in media studies rediscovered it as an early satire of digital narcissism. Today, The 10th Victim feels almost documentary. It showed us a society where killing became content, where morality was measured in views, where the game never really ends. Number 7. Quatermass and the Pit, 1967. Few films captured Britain's fears as perfectly as Quatermass and the Pit. It began as a television serial in the 50s, but by the time Hammer Films brought it to the big screen, it had evolved into something far darker. The story begins with workers uncovering a mysterious object buried beneath London. Scientists think it's a bomb. The truth is worse. It's a crashed Martian spacecraft. Inside are insect-like creatures that once manipulated human evolution itself. As the scientists dig deeper, the city begins to riot under psychic influence. The film mixed science fiction archaeology and demonic horror. It suggested that humanity's violence might come from alien ancestry. The church condemned it instantly. Newspapers called it blasphemous. Censors nearly pulled its theatrical run, citing spiritual offense. Production was intense. Hammer Studios poured its limited budget into effects that looked disturbingly real. The subway tunnels glowed red. The spacecraft pulsed like a living thing. Actor Andrew Keir played Professor Quatermass, with grim realism often rewriting lines to sound more scientific. When it premiered, audiences fainted. Some believed it was based on classified government findings near Hobbs End Station. The BBC refused to re-air the original serial for nearly a decade, claiming it provoked public panic. Quatermass and the Pit remains one of Britain's greatest achievements. It predicted theories of genetic manipulation, ancient astronauts, and psychic control, years before mainstream science fiction dared. Its message still lingers. Perhaps our demons were never from hell, but from Mars. Number 6. The Projected Man, 1966. In the mid-60s, Britain was obsessed with science turning against its creator. The Projected Man took that paranoia and gave it flesh. The film followed Dr. Paul Steiner, a brilliant yet unstable physicist, who invents a teleportation device designed to revolutionize matter transfer. But during a failed experiment, he becomes part of his own machine. When his atoms scatter and reassemble, he emerges scarred, glowing, and deadly, able to kill with a single touch. On the surface, it was another monster movie. Beneath it lay fear of technological progress and government betrayal. Released during debates about funding for nuclear research, it mirrored real anxieties about scientists treated as disposable tools of power. The film's tagline warned what happens when science goes too far, but its true theme was what happens when bureaucracy crushes genius. Production was a nightmare. Director Ian Curtis clashed with producers who demanded more gore, less psychology. The budget ran out halfway through shooting, forcing sets to be reused. Even the ending was rewritten in panic when the censors declared the original version too grim. Despite these setbacks, The Projected Man earned a small cult following among London college students fascinated by its mix of tragedy and technology. Critics mocked its effects, but praised its tone. There was sadness in Steiner's glowing figure, wandering London streets rejected by the very world he tried to help. Decades later, film historians reevaluated it as an early meditation on transhumanism and government secrecy. The Projected Man predicted a future obsessed with teleportation, artificial intelligence, and bioengineering. It was a story of progress punished, a reflection of the era's uneasy marriage between brilliance and fear. Number 5. The Earth Dies Screaming, 1964. Few titles promised more doom than The Earth Dies Screaming. Directed by Terence Fisher, known for his gothic horror, this small British production turned the apocalypse into chamber drama. It opened with silence, airplanes crashed, trains halted, cities lay dead. Only a handful of survivors remained wandering through fog-soaked streets, haunted by faceless metallic aliens who moved with mechanical precision. Audiences expected cheap thrills. What they got was existential dread. The aliens did not speak. They simply harvested human bodies and reanimated them as walking dead. The survivors argued not about escape, but about survival versus morality. Its tone was bleak, quiet, and unsettling. The British Board of Film Censors debated its release, fearing its stark portrayal of global annihilation during a decade still haunted by nuclear drills. Critics dismissed it as too depressing for mass audiences. Yet its simplicity became its strength. Fisher's direction made empty English towns feel like ghostly warnings. Behind the scenes, the production faced near collapse. Fisher had to shoot with a skeletal crew and little lighting equipment. The fog effect came from dry ice borrowed from a brewery, yet the limitations became atmosphere. The film's eerie stillness would later inspire directors like George Romero and John Carpenter. For years, The Earth Dies. Screaming vanished into late-night television slots before being rediscovered in the digital age. Scholars now call it one of the most haunting depictions of post-human existence ever filmed. It foresaw automation, artificial control, and our quiet dependence on machines. The film's message was terrifyingly simple. When humanity dies, the Earth keeps on screaming. Number 4. The Damned, 1963. Directed by the visionary Joseph Losey. The Damned was part sci-fi, part social nightmare. Shot on the English coast, it began as a tale about rebellious bikers led by Oliver Reed, but beneath the surface it concealed one of the most daring twists in British cinema. A secret military base hides radioactive children kept underground, victims of experiments preparing for nuclear war survival. The film was both poetic and horrific. The children were beautiful, glowing symbols of a doomed future raised without sunlight or affection. Losey used them as a metaphor for the youth betrayed by the atomic age. The studio, however, panicked. Hammer Films shelved it for nearly 2 years, fearing censorship over its anti-government themes. When The Damned finally premiered abroad, critics praised its intelligence, but British authorities treated it with suspicion. The Board of Film Censors forced cuts removing dialogue about political corruption and government secrecy. Even the ending was softened, though Lucy still managed to keep its haunting sense of inevitability. Production chaos matched its bleak tone. Lucy fought studio interference daily, while Reed clashed with co-stars in violent outbursts. Crew members later revealed the director shot additional scenes in secret to preserve his intended vision. Those scenes survived only in foreign prints rediscovered decades later. Though ignored on release, The Damned gained cult status through the 70s and 80s. Scholars hailed it as one of the first British films to link atomic paranoia with moral decay. Its influence can be felt in everything from Threads to Children of Men. The Damned predicted a world where innocence itself becomes radioactive, where governments hide the truth in underground chambers, and where progress and tragedy walk hand in hand. Number 3. Fahrenheit 451, 1966. It was the year British cinema dared to burn books on screen. Francois Truffaut's adaptation of Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451 was filmed entirely in England using Pinewood Studios and Aesbikio, British crew. Though directed by a Frenchman and based on an American novel, the film felt unmistakably British in tone, quiet, restrained, and eerie. It depicted a world where firemen no longer extinguished flames, but ignited them, burning literature to maintain order. Audiences were divided. Some hailed it as a visionary masterpiece. Others found it too cold, too clinical. The BBC refused to promote it, calling its themes politically dangerous. Britain in the mid-60s was experiencing media consolidation and growing anxiety about censorship. The story of a man who begins to read forbidden books struck far too close to home. The production itself was plagued by tension. Truffaut struggled with the English language, and actor Oscar Werner clashed bitterly with co-star Julie Christie. Werner reportedly sabotaged scenes, cutting his hair mid-shoot to ruin continuity. Truffaut wrote in his diary that he had never experienced such hostility on a set. Despite the chaos, cinematographer Nicholas Roeg captured one of the most haunting visions of suburbia ever filmed: rows of uniform houses glowing under gray skies. Upon release, British critics dismissed it as foreign and pretentious. Yet, within a decade, the film's predictions began to surface. Television screens replacing thought police surveillance, replacing conversation. When the BBC finally aired it in the late 70s, it shocked younger viewers who saw their own world reflected back. Fahrenheit 451 was not about fire, it was about silence. A future where truth burned quietly beneath conformity. And half a century later, its ashes still smolder in every glowing screen. Number 2. The Mindbenders, 1963. Long before paranoia thrillers became fashionable, The Mindbenders exposed the terror of psychological control. Directed by Basil Dearden, this British masterpiece explored how far governments would go to manipulate the human mind. It followed a scientist played by Dirk Bogarde, who undergoes sensory deprivation experiments for research. But when his colleague dies mysteriously, the scientist becomes the next subject. His mind stripped, his loyalty questioned, his soul reprogrammed. At first glance, it looked like Cold War melodrama. In truth, it was one of the earliest depictions of brainwashing and emotional conditioning on film. The British Board of Film Censors hesitated over its interrogation sequences, showing the subject deprived of time, sound, and sight. Reviewers called it disturbing. Some claimed it resembled rumored MI6 experiments. The government never confirmed or denied. Behind the scenes, Dearden demanded authenticity. Bogarde actually submerged himself in near-freezing isolation tanks for filming. Crew members later described hallucinations on set as lights dimmed and oxygen thinned. The director's insistence on realism gave the film a clinical dread that modern viewers still find uncomfortable. Though critically acclaimed, it never reached mainstream success. British. Distributors buried it, fearing controversy. But later generations of filmmakers, especially Stanley Kubrick, cited it as influence for A Clockwork Orange. Its slow-paced precision and moral unease redefined what science fiction could mean without a single special effect. The Mindbenders predicted the age of psychological warfare, data manipulation, and emotional surveillance. It warned that the mind, not the machine, would be the final battlefield. Number 1. The War Game, 1965. Few films in history terrified governments more than The War Game. Commissioned by the BBC and directed by Peter Watkins, it was meant as an educational dramatization of a nuclear strike on Britain. What the network received was pure nightmare. The film simulated the detonation of atomic bombs over Kent, showing mass panic starvation, radiation, sickness, and the collapse of civilization within weeks. Shot in documentary style with real townspeople playing victims, it looked so authentic that test audiences screamed. The BBC immediately banned it, claiming it was too horrifying for public broadcast. Officials insisted it might damage morale. Privately, documents revealed fear that the film would provoke anti-nuclear protests. Watkins fought to release it independently. When he premiered it at festivals abroad, it won the Academy Award for Best Documentary. Yet, in Britain, it remained unseen on television for 20 years. The government labeled it subversive, while schools secretly circulated bootleg copies to teach civil defense. Behind the scenes, Watkins endured harassment and blacklisting. His realism angered both military advisors and broadcasters. Crews used actual emergency procedures borrowed from classified manuals. The realism was unbearable. Charred faces filmed in close-up interviews with priests unable to explain faith after annihilation. When the war game finally aired in 1985, it silenced the nation. Viewers wept. Critics called it Britain's most truthful film. It had no aliens, no monsters, only us. The war game predicted not just nuclear destruction, but political denial itself. It remains a mirror of fear, a reminder that the future is not science fiction. It is human failure repeated. These films were not fantasies. They were prophecies whispered in the dark by storytellers who saw where progress leads when conscience sleeps. From atomic children to psychic scientists, from censorship to collapse, Britain's forgotten visions warned us all. Which of these films do you think feels closest to reality today? Like, share, and subscribe for more hidden stories from cinema's forgotten future.